Alright guys, today I'm going to talk to you about cadence. And what cadence is basically a rhythm, a fishing rhythm. And it's how you incorporate some extra action into your lures as you're fishing. So we're going to take a look at my particular cadence, how I feel about that cadence, and some other tips and advice when it comes to fishing for striped bass from shore, boat, or kayak. It doesn't matter. When I'm making this video, you might end up really disagreeing with me. You might think that lure selection is more important than cadence. To me, it's the other way around. I always feel like the retrieve presentation is always more important, because I've been in plenty of situations where other people are using the exact same lures I am, and they're not catching based on the retrieve I'm incorporating, and also in other situations where myself and somebody else might be using totally different lures, and we're both catching because we're using the same exact rhythm. And that's basically what cadence comes down to, is the rhythm of how you're going to be fishing. So you might think, coming from on my end, you might think I'm just basically the internet expert. But let's just take a look at these three fish. So these three fish were all caught on different lures in different parts of the country, all over 40 inches and 30-pound plus. But they all had a similar type of cadence they used. Even though my retrieve speed was different on these fish, the cadence was kind of similar. I just came back from some freshwater fishing, so this setup is not a saltwater setup. I'm just showing this as an example. So let's say I just cast it into 10 feet of water, counted a few seconds, and this is just generally my standard retrieve. See, I'm basically doing 2 to 3 rotations on my reel and then popping it up with the rod. That rod tip, it's like a snap. And everybody has a different rhythm when it comes to this. But when you do this snap, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, your braided line sends a vibration, right? And that creates noise, and we all know striped bass feed with noise. The other thing that's going on right here is that you're giving extra action to this lure and in an environment that might be somewhat peaceful, that these stripers might not be on the feed on. So, so for example, also, I'm fishing with a Paddletails swim shed here, and this is generally the retrieve I'm working, right? And I hope I got that in the whole camera frame, that I'm just kind of retrieving and popping, right? I see other guys do this. Sometimes the guys that are newer to this, they do these kinds of sweeps. I've been side by side with those kinds of sweeps, and I just don't find them as effective as more like the sharp. It's more of a wrist-oriented sweep as opposed to an arm movement. And it's the same thing when fishing a bucktail and pork rind. At least in my old experience from the surf, is that the action incorporated by your wrist is what really made the difference. And a lot of times you're fishing a bucktail and a pork rind, you'll let it sink to the bottom, you might be fishing a particular ledge, and then you start your retrieve with a snap, right? But at the same time, I'm doing the same movement when I'm fishing, any sort of bucktail, pork rind, paddle tail, anything. I'm trying to draw a reactionary strike out of these stripers. I'm not looking for feeding fish when I'm, I really don't even think I'm catching a fish that wants to eat any of my presentations. I'm just getting them angry, and they're swiping at it. And just keep in mind that braided line creates a noise every time you make that sharp snap. Usually that's when I get my hits, when I create the sharp snap afterwards. So let's say you're fishing some bigger baits in some shallow water, right? So for example, my retrieve might be totally different in some shallower water, but my cadence might be pretty similar. And what I mean by that is, so let's say I'm slowly crawling this big stick bait through a marsh, right? I'm still doing a very similar snap of the wrist. Maybe the amount of rhythm might change a little bit based on, the depth of the water, but the motion is the same. Just keep that in mind. All right, that basically covers it. I feel like this is such an important thing that people get lost in that whole shuffle of lure selection, and when it comes to any kind of soft plastic, bucktails, and sometimes with plugging also, this makes a world of a difference. Even if I'm trolling on the kayak, I'm still incorporating this wrist snap. I mean, casting with smaller baits, large baits. It's all about having that extra action imparted by you physically. So just keep that in mind. So that's I call this my golden rule for striped bass fishing. But everybody's different. You can have it different. It doesn't have to be this exact same snap. Eventually you're going to build confidence in your, everybody's different. You'll have your own particular wrist motion, and you'll start catching more fish, and you'll have that confidence in how you do it. But in general, the biggest thing I notice when I'm seeing somebody new fishing is if they're using their arm as opposed to more of the snap of the wrist, it doesn't give the same results. Either way, that's all I got for you guys today. Comments, questions, leave them in the description below. Hope you guys found this useful. And if you liked what you see here, subscribe, and we'll start catching some fish soon. Let me get out of here.